All right.
Okay, welcome everybody. Today is Tuesday, February 25th, 2025. This is Senate Committee on Institutions, and we are continuing to take testimony on S69, which is an act relating to age-appropriate design code. And we have several witnesses today. Thanks for your patience. We got started a little bit late. We'll take witnesses at least until 2:30, and then we'll have some committee discussion on the bill. And just generally, I'll say it again, the intent of the bill is to address the harms that are done by companies, certain companies, mostly very large companies, in the way that online services are provided to children, to minors. And so it's specifically the harm to minors that we are aiming to mitigate.
Then I'll make a comment that I think you'll agree with, is that if that's the intent, then the language has to reflect it. Which leads to my next question of if Rick has come up with his like extra.
He has, and I thought we would, that's part of the discussion, but yes, he has, yes. And so we have an amendment to address that. And then I just also want to say, if there are folks out there who are not on the witness list and have suggestions for language changes that would still fulfill the intent of the bill and reduce unintended consequences, please share those with us, because we can't do it if you don't let us know about it. All right, so let's get going. The first witness is Chris Delia, who's president of the Vermont Bankers Association, and you can sit right there, and we can,
I've met everybody.
You have met everybody? Yeah. Okay, good, terrific. Then we can get started.
Great.
We'll be very efficient.
Thank you. For the record, Chris Delia, President, Vermont Bankers Association. Thank you for the opportunity to come in and visit with you on this bill. I've listened to the testimony that you've been taking and the comments specifically from you, Madam Chair, and where you're trying to focus your efforts. And I think most of the testimony has been talking about social media platforms, et cetera, and concerns. You've also asked if there's a business in Vermont that this could be problematic to step forward. So that's why I'm sitting here today. And I'm not taking a position pro or con on the bill. I will, in the end, ask for a particular change so that it allows you to move forward with this particular piece of legislation, but would address our concerns. So we're not a social media company. We're entities that provide access to financial services in the marketplace. And one of the groups that we work with, and this is in part with regard to financial literacy initiatives around the state, is to open up bank accounts for minors. These are typically savings accounts, but sometimes they're also a checking account with a debit card. Because you're entering into a contractual relationship with a minor and they do not have legal authority to do so, you always have a parent or a guardian or a foster parent involved that will be on the account as well. So when I look at this bill, our reading, and I should say that any piece of legislation I look at also is shared with expertise within the industry. So this is their observations as well. Our view is we would fall under this bill because of some of the definitions and how broad they are and the work that we do with minors. So again, to be clear, we're not social media platforms. We're not using algorithms to draw you further and further into our websites. You're there to look at your account or conduct business and then typically leave. We have federal regulations and state regulations that dictate how we treat customer information and the privacy of that data, the protection of that data. What do we collect? If you've gone into a financial institution, we ask for certain information to verify in fact that you are who you say you are. That is required at the federal level under what's called the Bank Secrecy Act. And that applies to whether you're a minor or an adult or a business. We are required to collect that. We're required to secure it, maintain it, and at some point we're required to delete that information. So when I look at this bill and the information that we collect, under your definitions, I could easily say that under parentheses 6, we would be implicated, parentheses 10 as a controller, and 11 as a covered business. So again, banks must follow state and federal privacy regulations regarding their customers. We are also, in the case of working with minors, subject to COPPA, the Children Online Privacy Act. Under federal regulations, you have what's called Gramm-Leach-Bliley. This requires financial institutions act to ensure confidentiality and security of a customer's non-public information. And there's a whole body of regulation that's been promulgated. But beyond that, Vermont in 2000 went further than Gramm-Leach-Bliley and created its own unique privacy regulation that all banks must adhere to. And that standard is higher than what exists at the federal standard as far as protection of that data. We also have what are called record retention statutes. So whenever we get into conversations and bills about giving people the ability to delete their data, we can't do that because we are held accountable to federal and state record retention statutes that say we have to hold things for 5 years or 7 years or 10 years because of the importance of that data. So in particular, when I look at this bill, and aside from the definitions, most of the concerns began on page 15. I think of all of the privacy settings and guidelines that we have in place and the potential conflict this bill creates with that. What standard are we now going to follow? Because it looks to us like we have another overlay of privacy standards that we would have to look at. On page 16, as an example, there was, I think the language focuses on a minor could prohibit an adult from seeing their location. One of the things that you may never think of is we use a location or a URL to help us with fraud prevention. And let me give you an example. If I'm opening up an account here in Vermont and I live in Vermont, and all of a sudden the transactions start to come from a URL in California, that sends up a red flag for the institution to contact me, just to ensure that it is in fact still Christelia that's involved. If you prohibit that type of discussion from going on between the bank and the adult that's on the minor's account, that's problematic because it could hinder us from a fraud prevention point of view. We send out fraud alerts. There's a
Are you okay with it? Okay.
So could you ask for permission to have their location instead of just having their location automatically? Could you ask for permission? And then if that person does not, say this is a consequence of.
Well, you're now creating two different systems that you have to stand up with the institution to have the list of people who say turn that off and the people who say it's fine, leave it on.
No, what I'm saying is if they do not give you, then you do not have, then you stop the transaction. You don't take the business. That's a question.
I will get back to you, but I would struggle to see how our tack would be investigate with the customer. Is this in fact you from California? If so, transaction goes through. That is typically the approach that they take for the institution to prevent fraud when you're looking at the URL address.
So I'll follow up on that
Please.
question if you don't mind. So it's so this is where, say, somebody's trying to move money from one account to another or pay a bill. And the computer that they're doing that on is a different computer than the one you're used to seeing.
Yep.
And it's in a different place.
Yep.
Okay, so
Correct.
that's kind of similar to what happens with credit cards when you're
Well,
traveling and,
Yeah, and understand some of this goes back to 9/11 and the tracking of funds that were used by the terrorists, and obviously follow the money was a big part of that.
sure,
And new regulations that came out that helped to limit that type of activity, prevent that type of activity, and give the institutions the ability to work with the customer to ensure you in fact initiated that transaction from that area instead of just taking it on face value, because your transactions are typically from Vermont. So there's something unusual here that we're seeing.
right, and that makes sense. So I mean, we'll see the language that
Yep.
that you're proposing, but
But
I
so,
wouldn't think a bank would be a known adult user, but maybe.
well,
that-
these are just, again, reading through the bill, some
Yeah.
of the examples that I picked up on that could create conflict with what we're doing today.
Okay,
So fraud alerts, page 17. We have a standard system of sending out fraud alerts. We want those to go out to our customers so that they're aware of what's going on regardless of age, because you could prey on any account within the institution. Sometimes that's done at night between 12 and 6. Other times it's done during the day. So we would not want to see a prohibition on fraud alerts that might go out to individuals. Transparency, potential conflicts with the regulations. Again, that centers around a whole body of privacy regulations that are in place already that are very transparent to the consumer. We are required to provide that to any consumer that's establishing a relationship with us. We're required to provide it online to our customers and our online banking systems, and we're concerned with conflicts there. Data design and practices on page 18, the same things. Page 19, parents having access to the online accounts. That again is the adult that's been identified as the responsible party in the contractual relationship. That's important. Page 20, again, I would highlight that while this is working with the Attorney General's office, the Attorney General is not the banking regulator, who is extremely familiar with our policies and regulations and procedures that they examine us on to ensure compliance. So I would have a concern with the Attorney General's office now being a regulator of the banking industry. I would have concern on page 20 with customer identification processes and record retention requirements and conflicts there, or potential conflicts. Page 20 and 21 and 22, I would have concerns again with the Attorney General's office. So long story short, in looking at our body of regulations for our industry and the potential conflicts here, I would ask for one of two things. The first is you've been very clear to focus on activities that you feel are of concern, impacting children in a negative way, social media companies. I'd ask you to narrow to that. Or if there's a different direction that you're moving in, then on page 13, beginning on line 10, you will find the sections dealing with exclusions. And I would ask you to consider a parenthesis 6 with the following language, and I will leave this with you. Financial institution and data subject to Title V of the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, publication L number 106-102, and regulations adopted to implement that act. This is language that was adopted in Maryland in their Kids Code bill and is being looked at in other states as well. And again, would give us the clear indication that we are not in the space of actors that you are concerned about. We're not there trying to do things to minors, if you will, in a way that you would deem harmful.
okay, thank you, that's very helpful, and you'll give us that language.
I will.
So question, does that language include the Vermont? You said we have a higher standard for bank data than others.
Yeah, if you choose not to go with the GOB language, I could say financial institutions that are subject to the Vermont Department of Financial Regulation D-2018-01, privacy of consumer financial information. I could give you either one.
You wouldn't want to use both?
We're covered under either one.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
because
So I'd like
we
to
have
know
to-
more about, but that might not be appropriate for this meeting, or maybe it is.
Yeah. We have to adhere to the
Right.
GLBA regulations at the federal level. We also have to adhere to the Vermont standard as well.
Sure.
Applies to all institutions.
Right, no, I understand that, but when you're exempting yourself or those institutions relative to this, I would think you'd want to focus on the privacy regulations, or maybe you're just defining them as institutions.
Correct. Financial institution.
Okay,
Which
yeah,
has a definition in Vermont statute.
yes, so my preference would be to include the language that protects privacy. The language that
Yeah.
has the highest protection,
Sure. I'll give you the
if
Vermont.
that works, okay.
Yeah.
Do y'all have any issues? I guess not, okay.
No.
Okay, and we can talk about that. Okay, do you have questions?
Just looking at it.
Okay. Anybody? All right,
Yeah.
Well,
I-
Jim-
I'm sorry.
please, no, go
No,
ahead.
I was just saying, yeah, it's important that you get that to us, as quickly as you can, that legacy, that's not.
Yeah. I told Madam Chair, I did send Ledge Council the language from Maryland. But when I get back to the office after my hearing upstairs with the Commerce Committee, I'm happy to give you that language for the Vermont standard. Or I can just handwrite it and give it to your staff person, if that's acceptable. Either way,
I would rather.
I'm just gonna be delayed.
That's fine. I would rather have the electronic version.
Sure.
That'd be great. So that's okay.
Yes,
Everyone.
yes,
Just so I.
because we'll probably.
see it.
I'll
Yeah.
prefer like.
Thank you.
I bet.
I know, well,
Any other questions?
No.
that was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
yeah, great. Actually, I'm sorry, I do have one more question.
Sure.
So there's data that you can't delete.
Correct.
So but you do process personal data. So
We know everything about you.
exactly, I know. So that's what your privacy systems must be very good, I'm thinking.
They are incredibly robust. So you have to understand, and this is a conversation that you're all too familiar with, given last year's discussions on the privacy bill, but we never met with your committee, given the direction it was going.
Yeah,
You're talking about a banking industry and a healthcare industry, perhaps insurance, that have the highest standards in place for the protection of customer data, because we collect a lot. We are required to collect information. That's very different than many other businesses that exist in the marketplace. So when you're talking about, we have your name, date of birth, social security number, we have other financial information, we probably have your driver's license. We may have a copy of a passport if you don't have a driver's license, or other documentation, because I need to know that you are Wendy. That is our requirement under VSA. All of that information gets stored behind the scenes that you never know. Well, you know about because we're asking it, but it's behind the scenes, and it is built with multiple layers of firewalls to protect hackers from trying to get into the system, because there is a wealth of information in there.
right.
We have to maintain that under Vermont regulations and federal regulations for a defined period of time. Each process that we have in a financial institution has a record retention date associated with it. Even after you're no longer a customer of ours, we still have to maintain it for a period of time.
Right, well, hold on, just one sec. So I'm aware of that, and I respect those systems, and I trust those systems, right? As a consumer, I really don't have a choice of trusting that
Yep.
your organizations are protecting that data.
Correct.
You have more than you said. You have pictures of my house because I I have a mortgage and now
We got
folks
an
come and
appraisal.
take pictures of that. Right. Right. So,
And keep in mind, trust is a very important thing because the last
Yeah.
thing you're gonna wanna do is go work with a financial institution that is not honoring that trust and protecting that information. That
exactly.
institution will not be in business very long.
And well, as long, if people know that that's what
Oh,
has
yeah.
happened, if the customers know.
Yeah.
But so we've done a really good job as a society of protecting our financial information. The goal of this isn't just a data privacy bill. It has some data privacy aspects to it.
Right.
But to me, our children's information is as important as our financial information. So I just want to reiterate that because that's
No
part
question.
of my caring about this is that I think our kids are as important as our money.
I couldn't agree more. We don't distinguish.
And I'm not saying that you're saying otherwise.
No, no,
but it's,
I just want you to know, we don't distinguish whether you're 65 or 80.
Mhm.
We're going to protect your information equally because that's what we are required to do and need to be doing.
Right. So we could be partners in this.
We've been, and that's why I came in and said neither pro nor con
Yeah, yeah.
regarding the bill. That's your policy choice. We want to make sure you understand we're there already and don't want to have any conflicts with what you're proposing as we believe it could.
Right, of course not. And that's how we have termed the medical information.
Sure.
So this would be a parallel to.
Yep, exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Right, great, thank you. Okay, Senator Ingles.
But it's not just, it's everybody that's in business that has anybody fill anything out. We are required to keep that for a period of time, as you said. Whether it's real estate, it's 7 years, whether it's anything, it's applications for jobs. You've got to keep that for a period of time. It's everything that you do in this world that you fill something out that you have to keep for a long time.
Okay, let me just follow that up. The keeping for a long time requirement is typically a government requirement.
No, it's a state requirement. as
Okay,
well.
so, but it's a state government,
Right,
but there's privacy that goes along with
Right.
that data retention.
right.
And the privacy does not exist for
This
children.
bill is wide open to everyone.
Well,
And then
that's,
now we're starting to do exemptions. We
That's-
would have to exempt 100 more businesses before we're all set.
we have a solution that we're gonna talk about.
Sorry.
After the witnesses.
Right. I fully acknowledge a can of worms that I'm sitting here opening. And going to open it because of who I represent.
And you should.
And if you have an alternative that narrows it so that is focusing on the concerns that have been articulated by you and witnesses, then we're happy to look at that and offer any final thoughts.
Thank you.
Chris, just so you know, those worms have been opened. We're in the middle of fishing right now. So,
Understood.
so we, but I appreciate your testimony as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you. I will get your language.
appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks, Kurt.
Okay. So Laura. Darren Dinger?
Sarah Dinger.
Darren Dinger, maybe there's a,
Do you want to take one in?
Yes.
yeah, thank you so much for being here. And yes, please, and we can introduce ourselves if you haven't met all of us.
Sure, I haven't met all of you
Thank you very much.
formally.
Okay, so I'm Wendy Harrison. I represent the Wyndham District, which is down in the southeast part of the state. Sorry.
Senator Russ Ingles, pleasure to meet you.
Senator Joe Major, Windsor.
And Rob Plunkett, Senator Plunkett. Senator St. Louis, Senator from Orleans, kind of, and I've never seen a book have TLDRs in them. I will certainly be reading this.
Yes. So,
I'm sorry. Can you, acronyms are horrible.
Okay, so this is gonna be great for people online that get to know how young I am. TLDR is an acronym that was developed online in social media like Reddit and other online forums.
Yeah.
And it stands for too long didn't read. TLDR.
Okay.
Like if somebody's story or whatever is too long and they're lazy. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Well, that's,
See, this is why I'm on the committee.
No
I
one else
provide the explanation.
over 40?
Yeah.
or over 60, like myself, would ask you that, because they will just assume, okay, I don't wanna say that I'm old and have no idea what you're talking about. Thank you for,
In essence, it's a summary.
okay.
It's a short.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hijack your testimony.
All right, so you're aware of the bill that we're considering, and thank you for being here. So if you would just let us know your background, obviously you're an
Yep.
author.
Oh, yeah, that's
And-
not my book, but I'll give you the back.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So, thank you for having me. I appreciate the time to be here, the time that you have taken to allow me to talk. My name is Laura Derringer. I live here in Vermont in Middletown Springs. So, relatively close to your neck of the woods. I live there with my husband, and we have 4 children who are 15, 13, 11, and 9. And I always have to, those numbers keep changing. So
Yeah,
it's hard.
my kids too, that happens.
So I'll tell you, I guess I'm gonna switch around to order my testimony. What is my background and why am I here? And then I'm gonna tell you a little bit of a story about what my kids are doing right now. So, right now I'm a full-time mom to these 4 little kids, or sometimes I call them dragons in the wild. But before I was a mother, I worked for Doctors Without Borders overseas in conflict zones. And, Darfur, DR Congo, Uganda, Niger, kind of, you name the war zone from anywhere from 1999 to 2006, 2007. That's what I was doing. And, responding to, public health crises. And I always share that because the significant special part about Doctors Without Borders is that it's an independent humanitarian medical organization. So what that means in practical terms is that they do not take any funding from any entity, public or private, that could compromise or give a perception of bias even to their operations in the field. So that is really significant in what I'm going to share with you today in terms of how I frame what we're talking about. The other part of that is that in my work as a public health nurse doing emergency public health interventions, is that there's always more than one tool needed. We don't just do one thing. We have to have many, many, many levers in any public health crisis in order to have a meaningful impact on the health and well-being, on morbidity and mortality, on death and illness, to prevent death and illness. Especially, we always prioritize our children. So that's how I kind of came as a mother to engage this topic. It affects me personally because I have children, this topic of social media. It affects me personally, and then because of my background as a public health nurse, I look at things in terms of what are the top things that are causing excess death and disease in our population. With Doctors Without Borders, that's how we chose to intervene. We didn't go in with an agenda. We saw what is the landscape of morbidity, mortality, death and disease in the population, and we tailor our intervention that way. So in the United States, right, the leading reason children don't reach their 18th birthday is gun violence. So the second reason children don't reach their 18th birthday in our country for children over the age of 10 is suicide. Is everybody already aware of that data, or is this new information?
I thought it was guns and car accidents,
No, right now it's suicide.
and that's between 10
From the age of
after
10 and up.
So maybe there's more gun car accidents under 10, because car accidents and guns are pretty neck and neck.
Right.
What, do you have the statistics for Vermont specifically?
That statistic that suicide is the second leading cause of death for youth in Vermont can also be found on the Vermont Department of Health website. So, and actually in the long peer-reviewed references that I'm providing you, I can give you the paper and a digital copy. I have all of the citations, behind that statement. And then as another detail, just to support that, I can give you guys all copies of this graph just to reinforce.
Are you getting?
Yeah,
Okay.
you may take a copy of this small graph. Dr. Jean Pointy is a population researcher who has written extensively about this, but what this graph shows, if you're looking at it, is that this is specific to female youth, but this graph is, but the same trend we see for all of our youth, that in the early 2000s until about 2012, the rate of suicide, self-poisoning, major depressive episodes, and depressive symptoms were relatively stable. Upon the introduction and uptake of use of this product around 2012 is when we see this steep increase in suicide and self-poisoning, et cetera, in our youth population. So that's really what's motivated me to talk to you about this, because it's a crisis and it's urgent. And luckily, we have policies and solutions to do a U-turn. You can fix this. So that's the landscape. I do want to make sure everybody understands that. So when I speak today, I speak independently. I don't receive funding from anybody. So that means I'm not funded by Google, Meta, AT&T, Comcast, TikTok, Roblox, Disney, Amazon, eBay, et cetera, et cetera. These companies do not directly or indirectly give me money. That's really important to note, so that what I'm presenting you is an objective look at the research. So for my own kids, I don't use these products. I've looked at the research, and for me, they're just not, they do not have a safe enough profile to allow any of my children to use social media, or I haven't given them phones. What I did give my son when he turned 14, instead of a phone, he got an electric chainsaw. And so right now, as you know, it's maple tapping sugar season. And so my kids, up until a few years ago, would collect all the wood in the forest and just hand saw and then burn and have a maple syrup production. And when my son turned 14, he just said, I want to put up more taps and more buckets. So can you help? Would you mind? Could we discuss getting a chainsaw? So I said, sure. And my husband and I, looked at that risk profile, and we could teach him safely and give him training from local experts. So we did. He can use an electric chainsaw to help get more wood from the forest floor to, have his maple syrup operation. So I think that just needs to be said, that probably if you look at the risk profile, a chainsaw is going to be safer if it's in social media. The other framing piece that I like to talk about is that these products, when we look at the weight of the evidence, we call them health harming products. So even our former U.S. Surgeon General has basically said that when we talk about products and risk profiles, even when there might be some benefits, real or perceived, to a product, if the overall profile and weight of the evidence shows that the risks are this severe, we're going to not ask children to access or be exposed to this risk of harm in order to access some benefits. That is what he has said. And again, the citation for that is in the package I provided. But basically, it's the same way we say that cigarettes are an appetite suppressant. So conceivably, cigarettes could help people lose weight by suppressing their appetite, but we don't tell children or adults to smoke in order to lose weight. So that's my framing. And the New York City Health Commissioner in 2023 called social media products an environmental health toxin. So that's just important to really put out there, because a lot of people who come in are going to talk about maximizing the benefits and minimizing the risks. That's not how I frame this. All that said, even as a parent who keeps these products away from my children, I absolutely do support the Kids Code at 69. It's a well-vetted essential tool that is going to make the risk, if a child is exposed to these products, it's going to minimize that. So when I talked about from the public health perspective, we need multiple layers and multiple tools. This is an essential tool. In addition to this tool, in addition to the Kids Code, the other public health interventions, the other package.
Is it all right?
Yes. And do you need a second?
Second.
Okay,
No,
yeah.
sorry, of course.
When you say products, are you speaking of the device, or are you speaking of the product, meaning social media?
So I do consider social media to be a product.
Okay, I just wanted to, because you said, I just wanted to clarify what you were talking
Yeah.
about specifically.
So the package of health interventions that I recommend, that Kids Code is part of a package that also would include, as we talked about it being an environmental health toxin, the phone and social media free school legislation is another public health policy tool. Additionally, we look at Australia, they made a minimum age of 16, that is fully appropriate. And additionally, the US Surgeon General last year called for Congress to enact warning labels on these products. And there is now legislation that's about to be reintroduced. It's called Stop the Scroll Act at the federal level to start trying to create that precedent for the Surgeon General to be able to act on that. It's Stop the Scroll Act. It's a warning label legislation. So we need all of that. We need education in schools as well. And there's another book that I can show you just so you're aware of its existence. This is available as a book and digitally. It's for kids ages 10 and up. It teaches them everything they need to know. And importantly, for the digital literacy education, this is not funded by Google or Meta or Instagram. Because you will find curriculum out there that has been funded by industry. So the framing, going back to what I was talking about framing, comes out in what's presented to the children. So this book does not have that foregone conclusion of use. It doesn't say when you use these products. It says if you use them, here are the risks. It talks about brain development. It was made by independent health practitioners. So I highly encourage you to just explore this and know that this is a resource, because I have heard some of you talking about possibly a legislation regarding, education eventually down the line. So just to conclude, like I said, my kids, we don't use it, but here's the reality. I'm not gonna be able to protect my kids from all these exposures. The business model here is ubiquity, just like McDonald's. It is so intentional. McDonald's, maybe not in Vermont, although I was not happy to see a McDonald's across the street from the Rutland High School. But, at least not here, this city, you don't have McDonald's, but everywhere else, the McDonald's business model is ubiquity. So that is exactly what the online product industry behind social media has done. They put it everywhere. So that really I can't, unless I literally keep my kids in a bubble, prevent this exposure. It's happening in schools. Kids are being asked and required to create Snapchat and Instagram accounts in our Vermont schools. So we have to have some product design safeguards as an essential tool. Because like I said, even myself, with everything that I know, I'm not going to be able to prevent exposure. They're going to have their friends who are going to have products. They're going to get it at school, in a library, in the public library. There's so many options for opportunities for them to get this exposure. So I'm asking you as a parent, I agree that this is something we urgently need. And again, we urgently need the entire package, and we can do this. The legislation that I mentioned, the sort of complementary legislation, does not have a funding element attached to it. So again, for anybody who wants a paper copy, this is the reference list that's relatively comprehensive. I did prepare this when we were supporting the phone and social media free school legislation, but it does complement everything. The book I gave you, the Screen Time Solution book, is written by a former middle school English teacher, and she is Emily Chirkin. She's extremely well versed in this topic, and it really gives a great summary of everything that I just presented to you as well. And the other resource that's new, this book just came out in January. It's called Better Than Real Life. It's by a psychologist, Dr. Richard Fried, and the subtitle is How Silicon Valley's Secret Science of Persuasive Design is Stealing Childhood. I would really highly recommend you read this. Again, so importantly for framing, for how we talk about this, that two books to recommend for, weekend reading, that would be that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'd like to just see those, at least to get the titles.
sure.
Really appreciate your testimony. Are there any
And
questions?
you have to, yes,
I did not have time to staple it
no worries.
this morning.
How many pages are there?
It's 12 pages of references.
Okay.
So you testified on the school closing school bill this year?
No, unfortunately, your colleagues in the education committees, have not taken it up yet.
Oh, okay.
And, a version of that bill was introduced last year.
Right. So I was wondering if that was what you were.
Yeah, if I could urge you to help nudge that, I know everybody says they're busy, but every other state in the country is, just sweeping that out of the committee super fast. The from preschool legislation, it's also a very easy one. Tomorrow, actually, myself and a bunch of other parents and teachers and health workers are going to be in the State House for Community Support Day to encourage attention to be given and to this issue.
That's great.
We'll actually
This
have
looks
students
really, this looks really good. I like the level.
Yeah, it's written, so even a child psychiatrist vetted it to ensure it's written for ages 10 and up.
Mhm.
But we actually did a community group in Bedford, where we had parents and grandparents coming together every Sunday for 5 weeks to go through the content of that book.
Wow, that's great.
So, are there questions or?
I don't have one.
The document that you handed out, can you email it to Kayla?
Yes,
The
Yeah.
link-
I did.
The link on what we have doesn't connect to it. So.
Oh, really? Okay, yep, I'll email it again.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. I'll send you one.
Okay. I'll give you your books back. They're really, and they're actual books too.
Well, we
Which-
absorb information better when we read in print versus on a screen.
Yes.
Also, data supported comment.
Yes.
Thank
I
you.
understand. Thank you
you very
so
much. I
much. Really
appreciate it.
appreciate it. Okay. Now we have, our third witness. You need to, okay. Laura Marquez Garrett, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, who's an attorney with Social Media Victims Law Center.
Great.
Or is it Marquez?
No, you had it perfectly, Marquez.
Okay, thank you very much for being here. I think we already introduced ourselves. So I know it's hard being on Zoom, but thank you for agreeing to speak with us. So if you could let us know about your the organization you represent and yourself, and then let us know what you think we should know at this point.
All right, thank you very much. Excuse me, I have a bit of a cold and I'm getting over the flu, so it's probably better I'm not there in person for all your sakes. So my name is Laura Marquez Garrett. I am here in support of S69, which is the Kids Code Age Appropriate Design Code, a bill that I think goes hand in hand with the best practice of the phone and social media free school legislation. I think that's S21. I'm senior counsel at the Social Media Victims Law Center. We are a Pacific Northwest firm formed at the end of 2021 to represent children harmed by social media products. In just over 3 years, our firm has been retained on behalf of more than 4,000 kids across the US in connection with harms, including things like problematic use, anxiety, depression, exploitation, sextortion, accidental deaths, suicidality, suicide attempts, and completed suicides. Most of these are kids between the ages of 10 and 18 years old. So my knowledge when it comes to social media products specifically comes from meeting with hundreds, if not thousands, of parents and children, reviewing medical, school, police records, back-end data pulled from hundreds of these children's accounts across all of the major platforms, product testing and studies, discovery, and industry experts. I know more about these products than I think anyone would ever want to, just from the last few years of doing this work. As I sit here today, SMVLC is working with more teens just in the state of Vermont than our firm has attorneys. And that includes families from Chittenden, Lamoille, Wyndham, Washington, and Windsor counties. So these are Vermont's children, and these are dangerous. These are dangers that consumers cannot protect against with parental oversight, education, or any of the tools that are out there and available. And the reason is because these are product level dangers. These are health harming products. Now, I want to talk about just some of the defects, the defective features that S69 would stop companies from distributing to kids in the state of Vermont. As it happens, we are actually filing a complaint later this week on behalf of two incredible young women from Vermont. They're both currently 17 years old. And currently, instead of thinking about prom and college and all of those typical sort of teen things that I think all of us grew up thinking about, they're trying to move past an incredible trauma and years of lost childhood. They have chosen to stand up and to speak up against these companies, hoping that just maybe their stories will help to motivate courts and lawmakers to protect other kids. Now, we refer to these young women in the complaint by their initials. I'm going to use here the pseudonyms of Elizabeth and Shannon. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about their story. Elizabeth and Shannon both started using Snapchat around age 10. Snapchat is incredibly popular with young kids. It is advertised with bright colors and cartoon animals. It's known for silly filters, texting with friends. It's even rated 12 plus in the Apple and Google app stores. Like many parents, Elizabeth's mom looked it up. It appeared to be a fun and relatively safe product for kids. She also talked with her child about known dangers, right? Things like don't send your photos, don't accept things from strangers. But for those of us who don't use Snapchat and for those who haven't studied the way these products work, they utilize dark patterns. These products will trick kids into giving them access to their contacts and other personal information. They also tell our kids that the people on these platforms are not strangers. The following are just a couple of Snapchat's statements from the app when we tested it ourselves. We self-identified as a minor. We got messages like your friends are waiting for you, which included the cartoon animals and balloons. Interacting with friends is what Snapchat is all about. Add friends. 200 people you may know were online this month, and add them as a friend so they can see your story. Now, in every case, Snapchat was referring to complete strangers. Snapchat and platforms like Snapchat, they also reward kids for connecting with what they're calling friends. The way it works on Snapchat is you get a publicly viewable score. You get things like streaks and trophies and charms. This kind of gamification is incredibly effective when it comes to kids. The more you connect, the higher your score, the better you feel, the more friends you have, right? There's not a 10, 12, 14-year-old in the world that doesn't want friends. Now, what I just described included maybe 20 dangerous designs, but I want to move on to the harm that we see in virtually every single case, and that's compulsive use. So at age 10, Elizabeth was really into gymnastics. She and Shannon used to hang out at the local ice cream shop with friends, and their parents would take them to one of those arcades where you get the little tickets and the silly sort of cheap plastic toys. These were well-adjusted kids who were close with their families. Like millions of kids, after they begin using these products, everything changes. They start having trouble sleeping at night. They start waking up after their parents have gone to bed because they want to keep using. They feel like they need to keep using. They stop interacting with friends. They stop wanting to leave their room. They legitimately feel like they cannot live without these products. And I want to be really clear on this point because this dependency is not just on parent purchased cell phones. Now, we do see cell phones a lot because phone companies hand them out to consumers for free and parents want to know their kids are safe. But we also see all of these things happening on school devices, including when kids are in class. I have screenshots that would make you lose sleep at night. We see this on gaming consoles, on smart TVs, on tablets with parental controls installed, on friends' devices, and on the phones that any teenager can walk into Target and get set up with for $50. So kids are really vulnerable to these designs and they're losing themselves. When they start using these products, they start to break rules so they can keep using, and they start to resent the people that are trying to protect them and stop them from using these things. And these companies have spent billions to make their products work this way. That includes things like slot machine mechanics, continuous scroll features, the never-ending feed, those push notifications they send kids in the middle of the night and during school, Even the speed of the algorithm. Did you know if Meta slowed its algorithm just a little bit at night, a lot of these kids would actually be able to turn their phone off and look away when they wanted to go to sleep? Meta knows that because engineers have told leadership that, but they don't do it. They don't slow the algorithm because that means kids would use their products less at night. Now, all of this is to say, if you have any sense of what addiction does to a 30-year-old, put that on a 12-year-old, because those are the kids that we are seeing and working with every single day. These products don't need to work this way. It just makes them more profitable, which brings me to my last point, and that is the content and user recommendation systems. Now, these companies are taking thousands of our kids' personal data points. They use that to target these kids. They know how old each user is, no matter what they self-identify in age, and they use that information for marketing, for product development. They just don't use it for safety. It is counterintuitive, but I promise you, these products are far more dangerous when they're being used by a child. We see this all the time. For example, when a young girl opens an Instagram or Snapchat, they are often bombarded with explicit, unsolicited photos and sexual offers because they're young girls. In very plain terms, if I'm a 40-year-old looking for 13-year-olds and you offer me 40-year-olds, I lose interest. If you offer me kids, your store becomes my new favorite place. It is terrible, but this is how these products are targeting children. And this is what is happening because they are programming for engagement over safety. Now, when Elizabeth and Shannon were 12 years old, and they both self-identified as minors on these platforms, Snapchat pushed Shannon's data to a 24-year-old man who lived nearby. They literally recommended that they friend each other, despite the fact that they had no friends or anything else in common, except that this particular user liked to engage with young children. She did not choose Shannon and Elizabeth. Neither of them chose public profiles. They also had no way to stop Snapchat and other platforms from sending their data out to strangers. They also believed Snapchat when they told her this was a cute young boy, and they probably knew each other and were friends. One night, she and Elizabeth snuck out to meet the Snapchat friend at a local middle school. He drove them several miles away. He offered them vapes. He offered them alcohol. He then raped them. When Elizabeth left the car to go check on her friend, he drove away with their coats and their shoes in his car in December in Vermont. I've never been to Vermont, but I am told it is very cold in December. In fact, had an off-duty police officer not happened to be driving by and saw these 12-year-old girls in the snow at 2, 3 a.m. in the morning, they probably would not be here today. Now their story is sadly similar to ones that we hear every single week from a new teenager or a grieving parent, because this is how these companies choose to design and program the products they're claiming are safe for our kids. Compulsive use, it's not just a kid who likes to use social media a lot. It is a child so harmfully dependent on these health-harming products, they can't sleep, they stop eating, they have trouble concentrating. In fact, according to TikTok's own documents, it causes anxiety and depression and makes it difficult for kids to do things like looking people in the eye. Also, according to TikTok's own documents, its algorithm is so effective that it can hook the average user in about 35 videos, right? That addiction, that compulsive use, that is the speed of the algorithm. It is the data points that TikTok chooses to use, and it is the frightening accuracy of its targeting technologies. These are preventable harms. S69 is about how these companies choose to design and distribute their products on virtually any Wi-Fi enabled device in school, including school laptops. So I also want to encourage you all to speak to your colleagues about the phone and social media free school bill, because school really is supposed to be a place where our kids are safe. I cannot tell you how many of the harms that we see on a regular basis that are not only taking place in school settings and or on school devices, but it's because schools are allowing these devices when parents do not. Likewise, you all may have seen reports recently about kids that are dying. They die by suicide after being sextorted. Please look closely, because you'll notice that most of those kids, I'm going to say 7, 8, 9 out of 10 of those kids are high school athletes. That is not a coincidence. That is the result of the fact that Instagram, which is one of the most commonly used platforms by schools for sports teams, Instagram is being designed and operated in a way that is making it easy for predators to find and target these young people specifically. For any and all of these reasons, it's not just appropriate, but necessary that schools stop asking and requiring kids to use these products to obtain an education. It's not only harming kids, it's giving parents false assurances as to the safety of these inherently dangerous products. Every day, Vermont waits to impose basic duties of care and safety settings and help students obtain an education without having to be exposed to these harms. It means more addiction, more exploitation, more abuse. Elizabeth and Shannon deserve better. All of our kids deserve better. So it is my hope that the Vermont Senate will be courageous like Elizabeth and Shannon, vote yes on S69 and any other bill aimed at protecting kids and really imposing the most basic duties of care on companies and institutions that have access to our children. So thank you.
Thank you. That was very helpful, very just explicit and true. I mean, obviously it's your testimony. Those are very serious stories. How many kids in Vermont are you working with?
In Vermont, currently we're working with 8 families.
8 families.
And we are a small Pacific Northwest law firm, right? We're out of Seattle. We were formed 3 years ago. So currently it's over 4,000 families across the country in all 50 states, as well now as, Canada and the UK, but Vermont alone, it's 8 families.
And how many law firms are there like yours?
So to my knowledge, there are none like ours in the sense that this is all we do. All we do is we take cases representing children who've been harmed. I know there are a handful of law firms that focus on social, like big tech and social media, and CA Goldberg out of New York was one that comes to mind. And then there are a handful of plaintiffs firms that are involved in what are called the MDL and the JCCP. Those are the mass tort cases. It's not, it's not a high number. And part of that is that we just don't have the laws in place to protect kids, right? It can be really challenging to hold these companies accountable for their own actions, their own words, their own choices, when you don't have laws in place that address those issues.
All right, thank you. And then you'll send us written testimony, I hope. But
I would be happy to. Yes.
Thank you. I just want to double check my notes. Did you say that TikTok calculated that they can get someone hook a user after 35 videos? Was that the number?
That's correct. And given and I have it sort of calculated somewhere. I'll put that in some written testimony for you all. Those come from TikTok's documents that were in recent Attorney General complaints. And so I believe it was 35 videos. It's roughly like an hour, under an hour. I'll get those numbers for you, but yes, they estimated they can hook the average user in that time. And again, that's not content. The way that we think of content, it is the speed of the algorithm. It is the data points they are collecting and how they are using those to target users. And I want to add, I see the discrimination being addressed in S69, which is so incredible because that's really what this is. When you see how these products work with young girls, for example, I've spoken to hundreds who say, yeah, the moment I open an Instagram or Snapchat, I was getting direct messages. I was getting, telling me to friend people who were predators. I talked to adult women who don't have that experience. And frankly, more recently, I spoke yesterday to a 17-year-old. And in fact, some of these young women in Vermont have told me when they turn 18, around that time frame, they don't do anything different, but they stop getting those reach outs, right? It's the data. They're not pushing an 18, 19, 20-year-old's data to a pedophile because that's not good for engagement. That's discrimination, in my opinion. And that's one of the things that I was happy to see in S69, that it is really calling it what it is. It's discrimination.
Wow. And that's Instagram.
It's Instagram, Snapchat. I mean, TikTok. I see. Yeah, it's all of these platforms. They collect the personal data points and they target what they think will hook the kids.
And the high school athletes.
Yeah, so that's sextortion. That is a huge problem. High schools just don't realize this is happening. But if you look, I think there's like currently 41 kids recently who've died of sextortion suicide in the last couple of years. Those are just reported cases. If you look at that reporting, you will see that most of those kids are high school athletes. And it has to do with the fact that a predator can go into any high school sports page and create a roster. And now within, you can automate this. In fact, I've seen it happen. I'm not going to go into too much detail, right? Because we don't want to educate people on that. But we do want to educate people on the fact that you can use a sports website to get the access to these young people. I can tell, you can figure out how they did in last weekend's game, their favorite colors, their favorite sports teams. You can build rosters. And because of how Instagram works, you then get access to their follower and following lists. And so then what the predators do after they're able to get explicit photos from them, they say, okay, now I'm going to reach out to your friends, your family, your mom, your boss. These are high school athletes predominantly who are being targeted because they're so accessible because of these school websites.
Wow, and then one, please. So just one more question for me, and then maybe others will have questions. The cases that you have going in Vermont, I'm sure they're protected by privacy because they're children, or I hope they are. Once they're completed, is there a record with maybe the names redacted so that there would be a court?
Yeah, I can even, so I mentioned that we're filing one this week, and I will get you all a copy of that complaint as soon as it's filed. So we use initials and I use pseudonyms here today to protect their privacy because they are minors. But those complaints are public records. And so I will provide that because the complaint actually that we're filing this week includes a lot of detail that if you look at S69, you can see exactly what it's targeted at. You can see everything that I've talked about today in that complaint.
That would be very helpful. Thank you. And thank you for your work. Yes.
Yeah, and thank you. So you're filing suit in Vermont?
Yes.
Okay, and under what, how are you suing, essentially? Consumer Act, or is it something else?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Okay, under what legal theory are you filing suit?
Sure. So the cases that we file against these companies are based on product defect, right? So it's product liability, product defect. There's also negligence claims, but it's predominantly product defect. These apps are products. These features are products, and they are defective and or inherently dangerous in the way they're currently being designed and distributed.
And I don't completely recall from law school, but product liability, strict liability? Product
That's
defect?
correct. That's
Okay.
correct.
And right now, there aren't any guidelines for businesses that are conducting business in Vermont on how to design a product to not be negligent, so they wouldn't fall under a lawsuit like yours, correct?
I'm not familiar with Vermont law, so I practice in Washington and California.
Sure.
I will say that as a general matter, I think there's an assumption, right? I mean, that there's no laws. Part of what the litigation is attempting to do is also to say, hey, there are basic laws out there that every company has to comply with. There are basic, reasonableness, especially when you're designing products that are targeted at children and you're making representations to consumers that these are safe, that you can't connect with strangers, et cetera. So there's a number of theories out there. In fact, look, just for reference, our firm, I believe we recently filed, we hit 1,000. So we have over 1,000 complaints filed, primarily in sort of the JCCP MDL. This one will be a state court complaint, which is, that in the minority of these cases. But again, I mean, we think that there are laws, but there's nothing that specifically addresses these products the way that S69 does. Right, the way that laws are passing or they're going through multiple states right now. And I think those are necessary because there's a lot of nuances to these products that people don't realize. And because they have been operating without oversight, without disclosure requirements, it's important that states pass laws that recognize the specifics of what these companies are doing.
And is it fair to say that right now, pretty much any business could be sued if they're doing this, but there are no actual guidelines for businesses to follow?
I think that's probably right. I would certainly argue that if you're targeting and preying on children, you can be sued. Right? There's got to be some legal theory out there. But I think you're right that there's no, and that's sort of what these companies say. Look, in court, in fact, I'll give you a specific quote from them. The court at one point said, hey, what duty do your clients have to design reasonably safe products for children, the children that are using them? And the attorney, it was TikTok's counsel, speaking on behalf of all of these companies though, said no such duty currently exists under the law of the 50 states. Right? So
But
that is their position.
It's fair to say that S69 would actually give some guidelines for businesses.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, because we could take something like X69 and say, hey, wait a sec, you don't get to discriminate against children in the state of Vermont. You don't get to target young girls with predatory matches because it's good for your engagement, right? It would also give us guidance. I rattled off some of these compulsive designs. I believe with a law like S69, you would see a decrease pretty quickly in terms of things like anxiety, depression, other mental health harms, because you would have kids who could actually turn it off at night when they want to go to sleep. And that's right now they are designing to prevent that, right? They are literally refusing to slow the speed of the algorithm so kids can simply turn it off. S69 would give the state of Vermont some criteria to say, well, wait a sec, this is an addictive mechanism. You designed it this way and our law prohibits that. You don't get to target that at kids.
And just one question, it's a sort of, said there are 8 people in Vermont that you're representing. In terms of lawsuits, you mentioned one, are there others?
For Vermont, yes. And so we don't file those in the state of Vermont. And I can actually tell you right now. So it looks like we filed at least one other in Vermont in the multi-district litigation.
Okay, so not a lot, but any Vermont businesses being sued in this way that you know of?
No, and I can tell you, we represent over 4,000 kids. We've been retained by. We have over 1,000 of those complaints filed. I'm racking my brain. I don't believe we've sued any kind of business other than these social media platforms. And one of the biggest reasons, you know, the impact I think you would see, it will impact on advertising, because if you're saying, hey, you can't discriminate, you can't target these kids. Drug dealers that are on these platforms, right? They won't be able to use certain criteria to push drug advertisements. They won't be able to use certain criteria to push highly sexual advertisements. I mean, I guess what I would say is from a business perspective, it will certainly curtail some of the stuff that shouldn't be aimed at kids anyway, because it would stop these tech companies from being able to allow people to target these children. Again, currently when kids get on these apps, they are being targeted because of their age, their gender, their vulnerabilities. This would stop that, right? Or it would certainly at least help stop that. I don't see how that would harm businesses outside of the context of these companies preying on children.
Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? Okay. All right, well, please do send us your written testimony. Just when you think it couldn't, it's very, very sobering and just alarming what you've told us. It's really helpful to have the specifics.
And I want to add, these are not outliers. I mean, these are thousands and thousands of children across the country. Just on the time it has taken me to have this conversation with you all, I guarantee you there are hundreds, if not thousands, of children in Vermont who have been harmed in the exact ways that I just spoke about. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so, does anybody need a break? Okay, but I would like Senator, Dr. Radetsky, do you have a couple of minutes? I'd like us to be able to take like a 5-minute break. Are you pressed for time?
I have a 2:30 meeting. I just emailed them to let them know I may be late. But if you all need a break, I don't want to be talking if you all need a break.
Well, how about I make it 3 minutes? Does that work? Okay, 3 minutes.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.